there is no amount of planning, there is no amount of thinking about, there's no amount of idea generation that is ever going to teach you like actually getting into the field.
David F. Haas is a transformative coach for high-achieving men seeking deeper fulfillment. David's approach is direct and uncompromising, aimed at breaking through what holds you back.
Good enough is great to get started. If I want this YouTube channel to go to 1 million subscribers, I'm gonna have to lean towards perfectionism. No big deal. Like if it doesn't work, I'll just shift gears. I'll try something else. Perfectionism versus speed. And it's a fine line between good enough and perfectionism that you need to walk. And in this podcast, we're going to explore essentially what that fine line is and which way I lean on it, and what you can do to find that balance essentially that is required to put really good stuff out, but without having the perfectionism limit you. And so let's get into this. So the first thing I think that we need to understand is that perfectionism in some ways is a protection. Well, no, it is a protection, right? It's like if you pride yourself on being a perfectionist, then you may be using perfectionism as a way to not move forward, right? If you just look at this podcast, actually, we're sitting here recording this podcast. We had a guest lined up. They had a late flight, and they couldn't be here. So we're recording this podcast about perfectionism. And so if I was a perfectionist, that client not showing up may just like completely change all of my plans. I may not record a podcast at all because I didn't have a new podcast planned out. But Zach and I were here talking about perfectionism and good enough, and we're like, hey, let's do a podcast on that. And so I just go like off like riffing here about perfectionism. And so I think for me, I have always leaned on the side of good enough, and that has been in some ways like a really great characteristic that I have, because it allows me to move very quickly, right? Like I can pump stuff out like really, really quickly. Now, I think part of being able to do that, part of being okay in failure, I guess is what it would be for me, whereas a perfectionist isn't okay in failure. And so that's why they have to make sure everything's perfect so they don't experience the pain of failure. For me, I'm okay in failure, so I can pump stuff out really, really quickly. Now, that gets me in front of most of the competition, right? But sometimes I think the detriment to it is you become, I shouldn't say you, I become okay in good enough. And I think, as I'm just kind of like processing this argument through my head, I think for me, the mistake that I've made is that I've been good enough, and then I haven't allowed myself to improve from good enough as I stayed in it. So like, let's just look at my YouTube channel. This is a great example. So when I first started releasing content on YouTube, it's like I was just releasing in it. It was good enough. I was ahead of the competition. It allowed me to build my coaching business up really quickly. Allowed me to get in the field of like what equipment I needed, what people I needed to hire, how to train the people I hire. It answered a lot of questions. But after I answered all of those questions, what I failed to do was to continue to make it better. Even though I was making it better, I never set the intention to move towards perfect. I guess that would be the way to look at it. And so for 3 years of releasing content on YouTube, I experienced basically no growth, right? And it wasn't until recently that I set the intention to grow my YouTube channel that we started moving towards, I don't want to say perfect because it doesn't exist, but we started moving towards better content. We started moving to more planned out content, even though this content you're listening to is not planned out. But we started listening to the feedback we were getting. We started looking at how to make people click on videos. We started learning the language of virality. Zach, the video guy, started looking at how to become better at editing, how to make edits better to keep people's attention. Like we just got into the field of improvement. But without that intention, we could have easily floated for 10 years releasing good enough content and never moving towards content that is going to reach more people. And I think that was probably my biggest mistake. And so then if I explore that side of it, for me, it's like, well, why did I do that? Like, well, one is a lack of focus. I had my focus on too many things. The person who chases 2 rabbits catches neither. And four years of releasing content on YouTube is an example of that. I didn't catch any rabbits, right? And so as we get focused, we start to gain clarity on what is actually required. When we step into the field, everything that we need will be revealed to us. Now, my lack of focus is a protection mechanism as well, because if I don't focus on one thing, I don't have to experience the pain I'm actually experiencing right now, which is the failure of my YouTube channel growing, right? And so when I first set the intention to say, hey, I'm growing this YouTube channel, I experienced really quick feedback. I grew almost 100 followers in a matter of like a month and a half. And I was like, okay, I know 100 doesn't seem like a big deal, but to me, it's like you put 100 people in a room, that's like 100 people that are listening to your message that you're helping, that could be potential customers. So it's like, to me, 100 is good. Comparing it to the amount of followers I had, it was also like a 1,000% increase. Okay. So it's like, okay, so that was good. I'm seeing that as positive, but in the last month, that growth has slowed, right? The things that we did to get us up to like just essentially par, which is like good thumbnails, good descriptions, good tags, basically just kind of like leveled the field for us. And now if we actually want to stand out, we have to get even better, right? And so I have been, it's been in my personality to do the bare minimum to get results. And then once I get results, I shift to something else, right? And so like I can give you an example with respect to sailing. So in sailing, I started sailing. I bought a boat that was already kind of rigged up for racing. I raced. I did everything that was required and put a ton of energy and attention into it to become like a really good sailor. I became a winning sailor. I won the spring, summer, and fall series at the Grosse Pointe Yacht Club, first boat, and then from there, in order to get better would require a deeper dive. It would require more effort. It would require more failures. It would require more losses. And because my ego knows that I don't do well with failure, I just shifted gears, right? And so now I'm experiencing it in golf as well. It's like I set the intention to break 80. I did it pretty quickly. But now in order to get to par, I'm going to have to fail a lot. I'm going to have to face the discomfort of changing my swing, of getting better, of losing tournaments that will make me better. And so every time I get to that point, instead of facing that pain of failure, I just shift focus, right? And so this has led me to do a bunch of stuff good enough, right? It was like, I'm the jack of all trades and the master of none, right? And I know that quote goes on and says something else, that the jack of all trades is good, but I don't regret being that person. But now there's a recognition that if I want this YouTube channel to go to 1 million subscribers, I am going to have to face the pain of failure, and I'm going to have to lean towards perfectionism. I'm going to have to lean towards becoming the best I possibly can be, and set the intention to continue to grow, to face failure. And that awareness came to me by finally coming to the realization that I'm okay in failure. Like, I can handle failure, right? And while I say that very nonchalant and passing, when failure shows up, it fucks my life up. Like, it literally does. It's like I become irritable, I become angry, I'm frustrated, I'm impatient, I'm more likely to escape with food, or for me it's Coke Zero because I don't drink or do any drugs or anything. So I escape, I isolate, I'm tired. Like, it really messes my life up. And so those are all my tools to not feel the pain of failure. So now, as I begin to recognize that I'm okay in failure, when I start noticing those mechanisms show up, I start recognizing, oh, I'm avoiding failure, right? And so I'm doing it with the failure of my YouTube channel in this moment, right? It's like there is an energy in me that says, like, just fuck all this. Like, then you could even feel it when I said it right there. It's like a frustrated anger, like, fuck this. Like, what am I doing this for? What am I wasting my time here? So you can see how the ego is like frustrated and it's trying to convince me to quit. But I'm not going to let it, right? I'm going to keep pushing. And I'm going to face every failure, every video that I release that gets fucking 20 views. I'm gonna sit in that. I'm gonna ask, can I handle it? And the answer is gonna be yes, because I've done it already. And then I'm gonna say, how can I make this better? And so I think if I'm reflecting back on this whole idea of this fine line of perfectionism and good enough, what I would say is that good enough is great to get started. It's going to get you started way before any perfectionism, right? I'm a build the plane while fly it kind of guy, right? And so, and that's mainly because I learned from doing. I learned from being in the field, making mistakes, and adjusting. The key to getting to that line, though, which I'm not, I'm way more on the side of good enough, is to launch with good enough and move towards making a better product. So that would be step one, or that'd be the side one. Let's look at the perfectionism side, right? So if you're a perfectionist and you want to make sure every single thing is perfect and you're leaning too far in perfectionism, what you're going to do is you're going to be slow, right? And so that being slow protects you also from the pain of failure. So actually, as we kind of like look at this, it's both about the pain of failure. But I would say that I have less fear of failure than the perfectionist, right? But not doing things half-assed is kind of an excuse for not having success, right? Whereas the perfectionist wants to make everything perfect so that they have success and they don't have to ever experience the pain of failure. And so what the perfectionist has to do is they have to lean into more of good enough and recognizing that when they release something that's not perfect, they launch a business and it's not perfect, they're going to experience pain and they're going to have to lean into that pain as well. And the more they become okay in that pain, the more they can reduce the resistance to starting because they're trying to make it perfect, right? Now, what the perfectionist will have as an advantage, though, is if they're able to do that, what they'll have as an advantage is they have that attention to detail. They have that quality in them already, but they're always just going to have to be careful to make sure that that attention to detail doesn't slow them down so the good enough guy goes flying past them, right? And so the other thing that the perfectionist also has to watch out for is there is no amount of planning, there is no amount of thinking about, there is no amount of idea generation that is ever going to teach you like actually getting into the field, right? The best teacher is like just doing. Like once you get into the field of doing something, all the planning in the world like goes out the window. It's like Mike Tyson has that famous quote. It's like everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face, right? And that's kind of like what entrepreneurship is. That's kind of like what spiritual growth is, right? It's like you think you have a plan on how to succeed and how to make it all perfect, how to launch a business where you make millions of dollars right from the get-go. But then you get into the field and then it's like you just like realize like all of that planning was useless because now this showed up and you have this problem, you got sued and you know you got some government agency saying you can't do that and you're like, holy shit. It's like I spent all of this time planning but I didn't even have the answer. I didn't even have any of the answers because I wasn't in the field. So I think that would be the thing that really limits the perfectionist is they're trying to avoid pain by making it perfect, and in doing so they never get to step into the field and learn what is required to actually build a good business. So they're just going to be way slower, right? And the other thing that will happen if the perfectionist is when they launch and they think it's perfect and it ends up tanking, you know, and this could be for anything, they're very likely to just like give up essentially, right? Because they thought it was perfect. And then when they release it to the market and they realize that it's not, it's like devastating to them. It ruins them, right? Because they've spent all of this time, sometimes a lifetime, trying to get this thing off of the ground. And the other thing that I notice about perfectionism too is that they never really fully jump into the field, right? Like for the ones I know there are some that do, but most of them spend their entire life trying to launch that business, write that book, whatever, leave the marriage, whatever it is. Like, you know, most of them spend their entire life trying to plan the perfect execution of this thing. And it's all out of a fear of the pain of failure, a fear of like what's going to happen on the other side. And so they try and make it perfect so they don't have to face that pain. But it's like, it's almost inevitable that when you finally put yourself out to the world, you're going to face pain. And so if we want to sum this whole entire thing up, it's like both the perfectionist and the good enough guy are avoiding pain. The perfectionist avoidance of pain will cause them not to start. The good enough guy, which is me, his fear of failure is less, but when failure begins to show up, the tendency will be to shift gears, right? And to go and just do something else that they can do good enough. They don't want to push beyond the big wins, like in the beginning, like for example, like with the YouTube channel, I had all of these big wins early on. Like we cleaned up the page, we made it look better, better thumbnails, we were getting more engagement, we were getting more views, and it was like, oh yeah, this is sweet, it's good. But now we're at that stalemate, right? And so the tendency is to stop, right? So both the perfectionist and the good enough guy stop. The perfectionist may stop before he ever even releases, or he may stop after he releases and he realizes that it's still not perfect. It still didn't work, right? And so all of this is about pushing beyond the fear of failure. And so then let's just dig into that a little bit and then we'll wrap this thing up. So if you have a fear of failure, I think the big thing to recognize with this is that consciously, none of us are scared of failure. Consciously, we can say, I'm okay if I fail, like no big deal. Like if it doesn't work, I'll just shift gears. I'll try something else. And that is where most people get it wrong, because the conscious mind is only like 10%. It's only running the show 10% of the time. It's the unconscious that is actually running the show. And so to prove to you that that's the case is that my fear of failure is why I've never released something that's become like this big giant thing, right? Is because I have a behavior of avoiding the pain of failure, right? And so the unconscious is running the show, right? And so if I really want to get to the root of it, I have to continue to push through, and I have to start leaning into that pain of failure. And so what does that look like? Well, it's pretty simple. It's recognizing the tools that you use to avoid failure, right? And so mine are losing focus, like looking at the next shiny thing would be a great way to look at it. Anger, frustration, condemning, justification, escape through food, escape through Coke Zero in my case. I already said anger. Yeah. So like those would be the ways that I avoid the pain of failure. And so now I know all of that. And so when those behaviors begin to show up, I can say, well, why am I so frustrated lately? Oh, it's because that YouTube thing isn't working out the way you thought it was going to work out, right? You're not experiencing that growth. How does that feel? It feels like I suck. How does that feel? It hurts. Are you okay there? Right? Yeah, I'm okay here. Can we sit in the pain of sucking? Yes, I can do that, and I'll be okay. And then what happens is all the noise of the mind goes away, right? All the noise, all those protections that the mind created go away, and then you get back to work. You get back into the field and you keep pushing, you keep moving forward, and failure will show up again. But then this time, instead of letting it go for 4 or 5 days, right, or lifetimes, 4 or 5 months, instead of recognizing it after you shifted gears and went and pursued something else, you recognize it in a few days, right? And so it only holds you back for a few days. And eventually, you start to unconsciously recognize that failure shows up and recognizing the wanting to escape it, and then you just keep moving forward anyways. And so eventually we become unconsciously competent to solve for the pain of failure. And this is when you actually create something great, right? And so that same process works for the perfectionist and for the good enough guy, right? It's just like all about learning the protections that show up when you experience failure, beginning to identify them, and then leaning into the failure, just leaning towards what it feels like to suck, what it feels like to fail, what it feels like to lose. Just ask yourself, how does it feel to lose? You'll feel it in the body, tightness in the chest, pit in the stomach. Like you can feel it, and then just stay with it. And then say, can I handle it? Yeah, I can handle it. Okay, are we ready to keep going? Yes, 100%, right? And I think I basically just unpacked here like how you move to it. So just to recap, the perfectionist has to be okay in failure and use their perfectionism like dial it down a bit so they can at least get moving, so they step into the field so that they can tweak from within the field even when failure shows up. The good enough guy has to push beyond good enough after he has launched or has done the thing. And then that's when the pain of failure begins to show up for him or her. And so then we have to lean into the pain of failure there. But both of these things are about avoiding failure. These are the mechanisms that we've created. So I hope that helps. I hope that clarifies how you find the middle. The perfectionist has to move to the middle from the get-go. The good enough guy has to move to the middle after launch, if that makes sense. So if you got any value from that whatsoever, don't forget to subscribe to stay connected to content just like this. It also really helps us on the algorithm. And if you want the algorithm to continue to show you about how to improve and how to move up the scale of consciousness, click that like button as well to stay connected to this content. Thanks for taking the time to listen. See you next week.